I was sitting in my garden pruning roses when the phone rang, and my daughter's name appeared on the screen. For a split second, I felt the old rush of joy, but it quickly faded when I remembered how strained things had become between us. "We got married yesterday," Madison announced, her voice flat and rehearsed. She described a simple ceremony on Martha's Vineyard with Trevor's family and closest friends. No mention of me, her mother, who had raised her alone after her father left us when she was 8 years old. When she finished her list of details, she added, "We'll need the beach house keys for our honeymoon." Trevor's really excited to see it. That was the true purpose of her call, not to share joy or seek connection, but to request access to the small Cape Cod house that had been our family's treasure for 15 years. My heart tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure you get them." She thought she'd silenced me, but in truth, I was already planning the gift that would end Trevor's carefully constructed lies. It hadn't always been this way. Just 2 years earlier, Madison and I had been inseparable. She'd call me every day from her marketing office during lunch, chatting about work, gossip, TV shows, or her latest dating misadventures. I had raised her to be strong, independent, and kind, and I was proud of the confident woman she'd become. Then she met Trevor. He arrived at my home for dinner in an expensive suit, roses in hand, compliments flowing. He praised my lasagna, listened to stories from my nursing career, and offered to wash dishes. It was a flawless performance of the perfect gentleman. But something about his charm felt rehearsed, and the way he mentioned my beach house 3 times during the meal lingered in my mind. Madison glowed with happiness, so I forced myself to ignore my instincts. Over the months that followed, Trevor began reshaping Madison's life. Their daily calls dwindled, and when I asked about it, she explained that Trevor thought couples should prioritize each other over their families. The red flags multiplied. I learned about her engagement from Facebook, with no mention of me in the caption or the photos. When I called to congratulate her, she said an engagement party was planned for Trevor's family only. I wasn't invited. Then came more small exclusions: venue tours, dress shopping, holiday planning. I was gently pushed out of every milestone, while Trevor's mother appeared at Madison's side in every smiling Instagram post. The most devastating conversation happened one evening as I reorganized my linen closet. Madison, sounding nervous, told me she needed to set boundaries. Trevor had shown her articles claiming that women who prioritized their mothers destroyed their marriages. He wanted her to reduce contact with me, spend holidays with his family, and most cutting of all, reconsider the future of the beach house. She said she'd always assumed she'd inherit it, but Trevor felt it created pressure and dependence. She suggested it might be healthier for their relationship if I simply found another arrangement. It was clear he wanted the house. I hung up the phone with a calm promise to think about it, but inside, I knew I had to act. Not with anger, but with strategy. Within a week, I had pieced together Trevor's pattern through quiet internet searches and a few calls to Madison's old friends. He wasn't Madison's first target. There had been Emma, whose family owned a restaurant chain, and Sarah, a woman with a trust fund. Both relationships ended abruptly after families discovered Trevor's gambling debts and schemes. He was a predator, one who preyed on intelligent women with family assets. Madison's independence career and the expectation of inheriting the beach house made her the perfect mark. It was then I started planning the wedding gift that would finally expose him. On Friday morning, I drove to their apartment and left a neatly wrapped silver package at the door. Inside was a leather portfolio containing everything I had gathered over 72 hours: public records, newspaper articles, bank documents, and a note that read, "Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. With love, Carol." At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was Madison's number, but Trevor's voice roared down the line. "You crazy old witch, how dare you send us this garbage?" I sipped my tea calmly. "Hello, Trevor. I take it you opened your wedding gift?" He threatened to call the police, but I reminded him that everything I'd sent was public record. The screaming behind him told me I had struck exactly the nerve I wanted. What Trevor didn't know was that his family's past connected directly to Madison's future. His grandfather, William Morrison, had been partners with my ex-husband Robert in a real estate venture in the late 80s. William embezzled over $2 million, fled, and left Robert bankrupt and broken. The shock contributed to the collapse of my marriage and the years of struggle that followed. William later confessed to his grandson on his deathbed, revealing offshore accounts filled with the stolen money. Trevor had been quietly accessing those funds for years, living off stolen wealth that legally belonged to Robert's estate and therefore to Madison as his sole heir. Nearly $4 million untouched and waiting lay hidden in those accounts. My gift had exposed Trevor's entire foundation of lies, and for the first time, he realized he had underestimated me. That evening, Madison called me in tears, her voice hoarse from hours of crying. I could hear Trevor shouting in the background as she asked Mom, "What did you do?" I told her I had given them a wedding gift, nothing more. Inside that portfolio, she had found records proving Trevor's grandfather had stolen from Robert and left our family in ruins, alongside bank statements showing Trevor had been accessing those funds for years. At first, she clung to Trevor's denials, insisting he was being slandered. But I asked her gently, if none of this is true, why is he so angry? Wouldn't an innocent man want to clear his family's name? Silence hung heavy over the phone before she hung up. The next morning, I found Madison sitting on my porch steps. Her clothes wrinkled her eyes, swollen from lack of sleep. She carried a folder of emails she'd discovered on Trevor's laptop after he stormed out. The correspondence between him and an associate named Marcus Webb revealed years of planning discussions about the Morrison inheritance and strategies to maintain access to offshore accounts. Madison's hands shook as she laid the pages across my kitchen table. He targeted me, Mom. He knew about the beach house, about Dad, about everything before we ever met. She had already contacted Emma Chen and Sarah Walsh, Trevor's former fiancés. Both women confirmed the same pattern: whirlwind romance isolation, from family financial manipulation, and escape when confronted. The realization hit Madison with brutal force. Her entire relationship had been a carefully orchestrated con. For the first time in 2 years, she looked at me not with suspicion, but with fierce determination. "I'm going to destroy him," she said. "But I'll need your help." Trevor did exactly what we expected. Within days, he sent Madison a message dripping with contrition. "Can we talk? I miss you. I'm ready to come home." Agent Jennifer Lau, a federal investigator specializing in financial fraud, had already been tracking Trevor thanks to complaints from Emma and Sarah's families. When Madison showed her the message, the FBI saw an opportunity. They equipped Madison with a wire and set up surveillance in her apartment. All she needed to do was coax Trevor into admitting he knew about the offshore accounts and had married her for access to her inheritance. Friday evening arrived with a tension I could feel in my bones. At 7:43 p.m., Madison texted me, "He's here." At 8:15 p.m., she wrote that he had brought flowers and wine, playing the role of the apologetic husband, desperate for forgiveness. At 8:52 p.m., he began talking about a honeymoon and asked about accessing her savings account for deposits. By 9:31 p.m., her final message came. Got him to admit it. FBI moving in now. I set my phone down, poured myself a glass of wine, and let out the breath I'd been holding for months. The predator's game was over. The arrest made headlines by Monday morning. Local man arrested in multi-state financial fraud scheme blared across the Portland Press-Herald, accompanied by Trevor's mugshot. Madison's name was withheld, protecting her identity, but Trevor's polished mask had finally cracked. His bail was set at $500,000, a figure his family couldn't touch, with all his accounts frozen. Madison came to my house with Chinese takeout that afternoon. She looked lighter, freer though exhaustion still clung to her. Agent Liu said Trevor's been charged with conspiracy money laundering and fraud across multiple states. They're also looking into marriage fraud. She shook her head, disbelief still etched across her features. Mom, I can't believe I almost gave him everything. We spent that afternoon in quiet comfort, paging through old photo albums, remembering summers at the beach house and late-night talks over cocoa. Madison apologized for the cruel things she'd said, for excluding me from her wedding, for believing Trevor's lies over her own mother's love. I told her predators prey not on weakness, but on strength, on women who have something worth taking. Madison nodded through tears. Then I'm going to take that strength back, she said, and I knew she meant it. 6 weeks later, the trial began. Madison stood alongside Emma and Sarah, united in their determination to see Trevor held accountable. Patricia Winters, Robert's estate attorney, confirmed Madison's legal claim to the nearly $4 million still tied to those offshore accounts. Agent Liu presented evidence of Trevor's calculated schemes. The prosecution even brought Marcus Webb to the stand, where he testified that Trevor had been planning this for years, researching potential targets and identifying Madison as the perfect candidate because of her family history, independence, and assets. Hearing herself described as a target shook Madison to her core, but beneath her pain, I saw fire. She wasn't just surviving, she was ready to fight. When the verdict came, it echoed like thunder. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy fraud, money laundering, and criminal marriage fraud, with intent to commit grand larceny. Trevor was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with full restitution ordered to his victims. For the first time, the women he had tried to exploit stood victorious together. The sentencing hearing gave Madison a chance to speak directly to the man who had stolen 2 years of her life. Standing tall in the witness box, she described the way Trevor had isolated her, convinced her to mistrust her own mother, and made her doubt her instincts. Trevor Morrison didn't just steal money from me, she said clearly, her voice steady enough to make half the courtroom lean forward. He stole my faith in love, my trust in family, and the bond I had with the woman who raised me. Her words cracked only once, but she gathered herself quickly, finishing with steel in her tone. But he miscalculated. He thought strong women could be broken. Instead, he gave us reason to fight back together. Trevor sat hunched at the defense table, his practiced charm stripped away, staring at the floor. When the judge read out his sentence of 12 years in federal prison and restitution totaling more than $8 million, there was no dramatic outburst. Just a man who realized too late that his empire of lies had collapsed, leaving him broke and disgraced. Madison came to sit beside me afterward, her hands trembling, but her eyes alight with the same fierce determination I'd seen in her as a child. "He can't hurt anyone else," she whispered, as if reassuring herself. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet after the storm. The media swirled with headlines, but Madison and I declined interviews. This wasn't about attention. It was about healing. Emma and Sarah both reached out, sending messages of gratitude for Madison's bravery. "Without your recording, the FBI might not have had enough," Emma wrote. "You gave all of us closure." Sarah echoed the same, her relief palpable even through text. For once, Trevor hadn't left his victims isolated. We had each other. One afternoon, Madison came to my porch with a folder in her hands. "The restitution process has started," she explained. "Patricia says I'll receive nearly $4 million in recovered assets. It feels surreal, Mom, like I've been living in someone else's story, and now I'm finally writing my own again." She laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in far too long. Then her expression grew serious. "I know I said horrible things to you, and I need to make this right. I let a man convince me that you were the problem. I chose him over you." I squeezed her hand, telling her that forgiveness wasn't something she needed to earn. It had been hers the moment she came back. Healing was gradual. Some days, Madison carried guilt heavy on her shoulders, wondering how she, a smart and successful woman, could have fallen so deeply into Trevor's trap. I reminded her that predators don't hunt weakness, they hunt value. Trevor had seen her independence, her career, her inheritance, and her heart, and he had decided to take them all. The shame was his, not hers. Slowly, Madison began to believe that. Months passed, and with them came a sense of renewal. We spent weekends at the beach house again, walking barefoot in the sand, stringing fairy lights across the dunes, like we used to dream about when she was a girl. Madison told me one evening, her eyes reflecting the glow of the ocean sunset, "When I marry again someday, it will be here, barefoot, just like we planned. And he'll have to love you too, because anyone who doesn't respect my mother doesn't deserve me." Tears stung my eyes as I hugged her tight. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my daughter back. The civil trial that followed was swift. Families of Trevor's other victims filed claims to recover their stolen money, and Madison joined them without hesitation. Together, they stood as proof that women could not be permanently silenced or erased. The settlement ensured restitution for all, leaving Trevor not only imprisoned, but stripped of every financial advantage he had ever manipulated his way into. He had spent years convincing women they were powerless. Now, every dollar he had stolen became a testament to their strength. By the time the case closed, Madison had begun speaking with Emma and Sarah, regularly sharing stories of recovery and resilience. It struck me how predators try to sever bonds, while truth and courage rebuild them stronger than before. We had all been brought together by pain, but we chose to transform it into solidarity. Watching Madison laugh with those women during a video call one afternoon, I realized Trevor's final failure. He had underestimated the power of women united. Life settled into a rhythm again, though it would never be exactly as it was before. Madison began therapy, confronting the scars Trevor had left behind. There were moments when guilt overwhelmed her, when she replayed every choice she'd made, wondering how she could have ignored the warning signs. "I let him drive a wedge between us," she admitted one evening, her voice breaking as we sat at the old kitchen table. "I believed him when he told me you were holding me back. I turned my back on you, the one person who has always been there." I took her hand and told her what I knew to be true. Healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning from it. "You found your way back, sweetheart," I said. "That's what matters." As months passed, she began to rebuild not only her relationship with me, but also her sense of independence. She went back to her marketing career, with renewed determination, throwing herself into projects she once would have abandoned to accommodate Trevor's demands. Her colleagues noticed the change, and her confidence flourished. Slowly, she began to laugh more easily, the sound bright and unguarded, as though she was reclaiming pieces of herself one by one. The beach house became our refuge. Every weekend we spent there felt like reclaiming stolen time. We cooked meals together, lounged on the porch, and strung fairy lights across the dunes, just as we'd once imagined. One night, as the waves lapped gently against the shore, Madison confessed, "I used to dream of marrying here, but I thought it wasn't sophisticated enough for Trevor." The truth is, this place was always perfect. Her words were a quiet vow that her future would not be dictated by anyone else's definition of love or worth. The restitution money arrived in installments, nearly $4 million in total. Madison could have used it to buy luxury or status, but instead she invested carefully, meeting with advisors and choosing projects that would secure her long-term stability. "I want this money to be about freedom, not about him," she explained. I couldn't have been prouder. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, turning a legacy of betrayal into one of independence. Emma and Sarah became more than just voices on the other end of a phone. They flew in for a visit, and together, we sat around the beach house kitchen table, sharing stories of how Trevor had tried to manipulate each of them. There was laughter through the tears, an unspoken recognition that although we had each been hurt, we had also grown stronger. He thought he was choosing vulnerable women, Emma said, sipping her coffee. But really, he chose the wrong kind of strong. Sarah nodded. We didn't just walk away, we fought back. That's what he'll never understand. Watching Madison with them, I realized how community is sometimes born out of pain, but blossoms into resilience. The civil trial's outcome further cemented that resilience. Trevor's name was dragged through court records as victim after victim testified to his pattern of deception. Marcus Webb's testimony laid bare the meticulous planning, the way Trevor had identified women based on family wealth inheritance and emotional circumstances. He had even studied Madison's life before staging their so-called accidental coffee shop meeting. For Madison, hearing this was shattering, but also liberating. It wasn't me, Mom, she whispered afterward. It was never about who I was. It was about what he wanted. That realization freed her from the chains of self-blame she had carried for too long. By the time the trial ended, Trevor had not only lost his freedom, but also his reputation and financial power. The restitution order left him penniless while Madison and the others reclaimed what was theirs. He had entered their lives convinced he could break them apart, but in the end, he only drew them together. One evening after the trial, Madison and I walked along the beach. The air was cool, and the sky glowed with the last hues of sunset. She slipped her arm through mine and said, I'm going to be okay, Mom. I don't know when or how, but I'll find love again. And when I do, he'll love you too. Because anyone who can't see your worth doesn't deserve me. Tears blurred my vision as I hugged her close, the ocean waves crashing behind us like applause. For the first time in years, I knew we were both free. The day Trevor was transferred to federal prison marked the quiet end of one chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. Madison no longer needed to glance over her shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. She was free, and she was determined to live differently because of what she had endured. We spent long afternoons at the beach house watching gulls soar above the waves, talking about everything and nothing like we used to. Slowly, she rebuilt the trust between us, brick by brick, with apologies and small acts of closeness. One afternoon, she admitted, I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for how I treated you. I pulled her close and whispered, There's nothing to forgive. Love doesn't keep score. Madison began to channel her strength into helping others. She met with women's groups, sharing her story privately to give courage to those trapped in toxic relationships. Emma and Sarah often joined her, forming a small but powerful network of survivors who reminded one another that their voices mattered. They weren't defined by what Trevor had tried to take. They were defined by the courage to rise after he had fallen. Their bond became a living testament that predators can wound, but never truly win. The civil restitution process concluded with Madison receiving nearly $4 million, a number that still felt surreal each time she mentioned it. Instead of seeing it as wealth, she viewed it as restitution for the years of silence, manipulation, and betrayal she had endured. She invested carefully and promised herself that every decision from then on would be rooted in freedom, not fear. This isn't Trevor's money anymore, she said one evening as we walked along the sand. It's Dad's legacy restored to me, and I'm going to honor it. We began to talk more about the future, about possibilities beyond the shadow of Trevor. Madison confessed she still dreamed of a wedding at the beach house, barefoot in the sand, fairy lights strung between the dunes, surrounded not by pretense or wealth, but by genuine love and acceptance. When I find the right person, she said with a smile I hadn't seen in years, he'll stand beside me here. And he'll understand that if he doesn't love my mother too, he doesn't deserve me. In that moment, the long journey of pain and betrayal crystallized into something unexpected: hope. Looking back now, I see clearly that the gift I gave Madison was never about documents or financial restitution. It was the gift of truth, and truth has a way of setting people free. Trevor thought isolating her from her family would make her weaker. Instead, it made our reunion stronger, our bond deeper, and our determination fiercer. He underestimated what happens when a woman's love for her child is tested, and he lost everything because of it. The lesson is simple, but profound. Predators thrive on silence, on dividing people from the ones who love them. But truth once spoken cannot be undone. Lies collapse under the weight of facts, and manipulation fails when confronted with resilience. What Trevor tried to shatter, we rebuilt stronger than before. Madison reclaimed her independence, her dignity, and her trust in herself. And I, as her mother, learned that sometimes the most powerful act of love is refusing to stay silent when everything inside you demands you fight for the one you love. If this story moved you, remember, you are never alone in your struggles, and your voice matters more than you know. Please, like this video if you believe in the power of truth. Share it with someone who might need courage today. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice, and comment below with your own thoughts or experiences. Together, our voices can keep the light of truth burning.